นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Last night at about midnight, we joined a Zoom conference of Thai Buddhist monks from all over the world, throughout Asia, Australasia, Europe, North South America, Africa. There are now Buddhist monks, not just from the Thai tradition, but all traditions, living all over the world. The purpose of our meeting last night was to pay respects and ask forgiveness from the most senior monk in our tradition who oversees, supervises all the Thai Buddhist monks going around the world, establishing monasteries, teaching the Dhamma. That includes us, because we're part of the Thai Sangha. And of course, now that travel restrictions are finished post-COVID, there's a lot more travel for the purpose of teaching Dhamma, serving the Buddhist community, receiving invitations for those who are new to Buddhism and want to find out, those who are already Buddhist and want to keep practicing and receive guidance. And the number of monks around the world is probably growing. And certainly monasteries are established in far-off countries that you might not associate with Buddhism. This is because, I would say, many of the truths that the Buddha was pointing to are universal. They apply to everyone, wherever they are in the world. Whatever your cultural background, whatever country, ethnic group, whatever your religious background, the Buddha's teachings are really pointing to universal truths that you might say are nature or natural truths. Truths are truths, timeless truths. Or the truth is timeless. And the word Dhamma actually means that which maintains itself, in the sense that the truth maintains itself. The Buddha even said the truths he was pointing to are always there, whether a Buddha arises in the world or not. The truth is the truth. So, say the Four Noble Truths, which are at the center of our practice, they will always apply to human existence, pre-Buddha, or if Buddhism disappears from the world, these truths will still apply. That there is suffering, which is to be known, has its cause, which is to be abandoned. And there is a path that leads to the end of suffering, which is to be developed, and there is the end of suffering, which is to be realized. These simple truths apply throughout time. They're not limited to the Buddhist era, and they're not limited to Buddhists. So of course, many people in the world already have maybe some understanding of what the Buddha was talking about, even if they've never met the Buddha or read or heard his teachings. Because these truths are universal and apply to our lives as human beings. And the qualities that we're developing, what you might call wholesome Dhamma, Kusala Dhamma, is what we develop. Unwholesome qualities akusala dhamma is what we're abandoning through the practice. Ultimately, these are not Buddhist, or they don't belong to any group of people or belong to the Buddhists. Again, these are just natural truths that the Buddha pointed to about the human mind and human experience, that wholesome dhammas bring with them happiness and contribute to our happiness and well-being, even just as mental states, and then they lead on to us making wholesome karma through his body, speech and mind. And then unwholesome mental states, rooted in greed, anger, delusion, when acted on, lead to unwholesome, negative karma. That's not really Buddhist, that's a Buddhist teaching pointing to the truth, but wholesome and unwholesome karma are just the way things are, the Buddha would say. And the qualities we're developing are human, just human, basic human qualities that we have, but we need to develop further. So when we come to meditate, we're talking about cultivating mindfulness, the quality of knowing, clear comprehension, understanding, comprehending what we're doing from moment to moment, effort, and then insight or discernment. All these qualities of mind are there in the human mind, not just the mind of Buddhists, the mind of anyone, but whether they're developed or not, that's a different matter. Even animals have some intelligence, some mindfulness, but it's not yet developed towards freeing them from suffering. Unfortunately, they haven't got the faculty to really penetrate and understand the Four Noble Truths yet, but they still have intelligence which they use to get their food, survive, live in the world, and so on. So the Buddha was taking what we have already, human resources. We have intelligence, we have a mind that knows things and can be cultivated. We have a body which can be used to do many things, good things. He's taking our basic resources as a human being and giving us the means to use these resources wisely for our benefit and for the benefit of others. And as we practice meditation, that's something to bear in mind. We're practicing, cultivating qualities that will improve us or help us to be more peaceful and have more clarity and understanding of the way the world is. And that's going to be good for the people around us as well as ourselves. So even though when we come to meditate, we're, you might say, taking time off from other things. Some people say being selfish, your own retreat, cutting yourself off from the real world. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Even our own mind has that doubt come up when we meditate. We have to remind ourselves of the ultimate or long-term benefit and happiness that comes from the practice, and that helps others as well as ourselves. Just as Buddhist monks are now moving and living around the world for the benefit of many people, our own practice may not be a monk or a nun, but our own practice is ultimately for the benefit of others as well as ourselves. But we have to take the raw materials, the basic human resources we have, and build on them, develop them. And of course, everyone has their own personality, character, skills, strengths, weaknesses. We're not all exactly the same, but in some respects we're the same, because The four noble truths are universal. Universal truths such as impermanence apply to all of us and so on. But within that we have our own personality and karma. So then we have to also become more sensitive to our own character as we practice. So sometimes that helps us to determine how to meditate, what to use, what meditation object to use, and what method to use to train ourselves based on our own character. As we know in the texts, not so much from the Buddha but from teachers after the Buddha, we talk about people with different character types. The greedy one, or the lustful mindset, the angry one, the deluded one, the warrior, the one that's full of faith, the one who likes to contemplate, discern things, understand things. We all have our different character types. And of course, we all have this everything in one form or another. We all have greed, anger, delusion. We all have some faith, otherwise you wouldn't be here listening to me. We all like to investigate the Dhamma sometimes. We all worry sometimes. Ajahn Chah used to say, when you're learning about your character, you're observing what comes up more often, what qualities of mind come up, what obstacles, hindrances come up more often. So that takes observation. We have to apply our mindfulness and the ability to discern, investigate things, to recognize our own character. And then we need to apply different teachings and practices to help once we understand better our own nature. So they say one who is of a greedy type, then sometimes they need to contemplate the unattractive side of the things that they're greedy or lustful for, whether it's the physical body or beautiful clothes, furnishings, all the kind of new shiny things that the world has to offer. That person has to use a lot of reflection on impermanence and unattractiveness. Otherwise they're forever obsessed with the things that they like and seek. This is to bring the mind back to a place of balance up the mind by focusing on the unattractive side, the impermanent side of what they like. And then the mind goes quieter, doesn't it, when it notices that, when it sees that part of reality. Or the person who is always getting angry and irritated needs to cultivate a lot of kindness and compassion, metta and karuna. Again, to bring the mind back to this place of normality in the middle. Whether you just have a little bit of greed from time to time, or a lot, or some anger from time to time, or a lot, there are methods we employ, meditations and reflections we use to help deal with these obstacles that come up in the practice. And we have to get to know ourselves as we do that. You recognize habits of mind, character traits that come up. Partly we recognize from the results, like the states of mind that we experience as we're meditating, we notice, I'm always getting irritated, or I'm always thinking about the things I want and like. The deluded character often is falling asleep, it's one thing, or else caught into misperceptions, wrong views, wrong understandings about things. The joke we have here is, the person who sees the tree stump as a kangaroo, or the kangaroo as a tree stump, never quite sure what is what. Or the warrior is sitting there worrying all the time. You get to know your character by observing your mind, what's coming up. But also externally, how you live your life will also reflect your character. So there are those who are always seeking out new things, shiny, beautiful things, beautiful people, beautiful objects to satisfy their lust and their greed. Always counting their money. I remember there was one time somebody, an older lady, was suffering from memory loss, but she could always remember her money, how much money she had. The things we hold important, even when we lose our memory, we still remember the important things. So if money is important to you, you always kind of have one eye on how much money you've got in your bank account or your purse. With anger, it's the same. You'll notice you may have, if you're an angry type, it comes up all the time in the way you speak. You'll be speaking in negative ways, always talking about the faults of yourself, other people, the world, what's wrong, focusing on the negative aspects of life. And you may notice that in your relationships with other people, how you relate to the world. Some people bang around a lot because of their anger. I remember when I first became an anagarika, a white robe trainee in Thailand, there was another anagarika who was really struggling because he was always angry about everything, even things that didn't really deserve anger. Sometimes you understand why people get angry when they're in pain or something goes wrong, but in things that are really beyond your control, sometimes you wonder why people get angry about, say, hot weather or mosquitoes or something like that. And this white-robed anagarika took his anger out on material things. So he's always bashing things and smashing things and knocking things. Previously to being in the monastery, I think he knocked a few people. In the monastery he didn't knock any people, but he knocked physical things. So every day I'd hear him go back to his hut, because in the forest you can sort of hear the sounds from your neighbour's hut, because the forest is quite quiet. Every time he'd walk into his hut, he'd start banging the walls with anger and frustration. And the length of time he would bang the walls would indicate how angry he was that day. So sometimes it's just one or two punches. Other times it'd go on for 5 minutes, just constantly banging the wall out of frustration. So felt very sorry for him, but also it's something to learn, isn't it? If you're taking out your anger on people through your words or bashing things, smashing things, knocking things, then that's something to work on and recognize. Obviously, that anagarika needed to develop metta, and I'm sure he did, but we need to get to know what's coming up in our life. Sometimes it's subtle, like if you're very intelligent, and your kilesas, your greed, anger, delusion, and the way they come out may be very subtle. So people have their subtle anger, where they subtly find fault with the world around them and text about it, write about it, introduce it into conversation, but in a very subtle, almost unknown way. So that's going to be harder to pick up on. You have to review what you say, what you do, what you write, if that's how it comes out. So getting to know your character is one of the tasks of the practice, but also it's one of the results of practicing mindfulness, clear comprehension. You start to notice things about yourself. What unwholesome mental defilements come up, then the suffering they cause. One way to observe and identify things is observe the suffering that is coming up in your life. You maybe damaged relationships with other people, family members, co-workers and so on. maybe damaged property if you're one who hits things. Or maybe if you have a lot of greed, you're always getting into debt because you're always buying the newest thing, or you're always bothering people, loaning money. Sometimes people get into gambling and things because of their obsessive greed. So the suffering that comes from these mental defilements is one clue or avenue that helps you to come into your mind and say, oh, I keep suffering with this. What is the root cause of this? Of course, sometimes they alternate as well. So we get angry. If you have a lot of greed, you get angry when you don't get what you want. So it's not like they're totally separate from each other. They work together. And so if you're constantly thinking about something, wanting something, and then you don't get it, well, then that will fuel anger. The root cause of all our mental defilements and unwholesome states is delusion. So the Buddha said the shortcut to changing your character for the better, letting go of some of the more negative aspects, is cultivating mindfulness, clear comprehension, and then insight, to see the impermanent nature of mental states, to see the suffering and to see that they're not self. And part of the reason we keep suffering is because we keep identifying with our mental states, moods that come up, and then behaving accordingly. We keep saying those things, doing those things that come back on us. And often we feel it's almost like that's who I am, it's part of me. I am the angry one, the greedy one, the deluded one, the worrier. We identify with that so strongly that we just take it for granted or accept it. We assume that's who we are. I am what I think, and possibly never question it or never look for anything beyond that. But when you come to meditate, you have a chance to really investigate this and get to know yourself and make changes. That's why the astrologer is afraid of the meditator, because meditation changes your karma, changes your character for the better quicker than any other method. Fear, anxiety, greed, anger, delusion can all be abandoned through cultivating mindfulness and discernment, but we have to apply ourselves to the practice. We have to do it. So sometimes just seeing the suffering of what we attach to and identify with, and then investigating to see its impermanent nature, see the process of causes and conditions giving rise to things, and then changing accordingly. Changing behavior by little bringing up the mindfulness and reflecting. Especially on retreat, you have a really good time to observe yourself over a period of a few days, because you're cutting off distractions, I hope, minimizing interaction with other people, other activities. The more you do that, the more you'll get out of your retreat, so that then you can really observe yourself. What kind of thoughts, memories are coming up, how you act through your day, how much you sleep, how much you eat, what you think about, what you want to do. Even in a retreat, you'll have desires come up. I want to do this, I want to think about that, do this, do that. You have a really good opportunity to observe yourself and get to understand yourself better, because it's a controlled situation, so like a controlled experiment. You can see some of the character traits that come up more clearly. So we have to be very patient and keep coming back to the mindfulness. And this quality of mindfulness is, we call it, sometimes we say, non-judgmental awareness. Just knowing things from a place of non-bias, non-attachment. It's hard to maintain, but that's why we put effort into sitting, walking with mindfulness, watching the breath, to be mindful of the breath, and then to be mindful of ourselves as we're doing that. To walk with mindfulness. As you bring up mindfulness and it becomes more steady, then you get to know your mind. Mindfulness, your mind you're fully aware of your mind. That's the aim. And this constantly knowing an object such as the breath or the feet as you're walking or reciting Buddha will bring you more and more of this inner awareness, mindfulness. And that's where you begin to observe things from a place of detachment, where you can observe without bias, without grasping or getting too caught up in the thoughts, the moods. Even though we talk about practicing mindfulness, keeping the mind in the present moment, we learn a certain amount by reflecting back on things. And it's not wrong in your practice to pick times to reflect back on previous events, what you remember about your day. Say a good practice at the end of the day is reflect on what you've said and done since you got up in the morning. To do this with mindfulness and with discernment, and reflect back, the conversations you've had, how useful and helpful were they to the practice, how distracting were they, how honest you were, how kind you were, how truthful you were in the words you said, how beneficial were they, or were they sort of useless, just conducive to fuzziness of mind, confusion, adding to the world's confusion through our speech. Sometimes we have to start in this way, reflecting back on previous behavior. But as you do that mindfully, and then with discernment, you're reflecting first of all on just the wholesome or unwholesome, the skillful, the unskillful nature of your speech, your actions through the day, say. You learn from that. You learn what was a good thing, something that you feel was right, good to do, helpful, what was maybe not so good. And even though it's too late to change that, you're turning it into your advantage by learning from it. And in time, the mindfulness will arise at the time you're about to speak or about to act, if you practice in this way. Your mindfulness will, as it were, catch up with events. So if you've been reflecting on your speech, your actions through the day for a number of days, then you'll notice these patterns, character traits coming out, what you've done that you thought was good, what you've done that was maybe not so good. And then in different situations, before you've even said or done anything, that kind of mindfulness and reflection will come up. You're discerning between what is wholesome and unwholesome. It will become more clear to you. So one of the qualities of mindfulness is it helps you to keep abreast of things, keep in touch with what you're thinking, but also what you're doing, what you're saying, through practice. And then as you learn from that, we even learn from the suffering. Suffering can be something useful to us if we apply mindfulness and discernment to it. You learn from mistakes, we learn what was causing us to be angry, upset, feeding our defilements more and more. You learn from suffering, then your behavior starts to modify. Maybe you're more careful, or you just introduce more metta if you're getting more angry, or more restraint and contentment if you're obsessed and caught up in different forms of greed and attachment. And so on. You introduce Dhamma based on what you're learning, what you're observing as you're becoming more mindful. And this will also feed back into when you meditate. Your general sila, your personal discipline, mindfulness in daily life will improve, and then when you meditate you have less to work through because you're not creating so much stress and suffering through your speech and actions. And then when you come on a retreat like this, then there's a chance to really go in deeper. You really set aside other concerns with life, with work, relationships, money, health, all the things that normally fill our mind and bother us. You can set it all aside and just really focus your mind on cultivating a more refined, continuous awareness, mindfulness on an object, on the breath, for example. You really get to know the breath from moment to moment. Breathe in, breathe out. And improve your skill at letting go. And letting go is a skill, and one way you let go is by understanding the benefit of it and then relaxing and enjoying letting go because you know it's helpful. You're letting go of that negative thought, that worry, that obsessive thought. You know, if I let go of this, at first it's hard, but if I do it, then I go to a higher peace or a deeper kind of peace and happiness. And the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist path is based on this. You're letting go of a coarser attachment or kind of happiness by attaining a higher, deeper, more profound kind of happiness. And when you meditate, you really understand this, because you see when you let go of things that you normally hold on to and identify with, even though you may be nervous about this or find it, you're concerned, what will I have left if I let go of everything? But once you do it, and you taste the freedom of a mind that is peaceful, you start to enjoy letting go. And letting go is not being negligent or careless. Letting go is done with mindfulness and with discernment and understanding. But you're letting go because you realize you can let go. You don't need to hold on to every memory, every thought, every desire, positive or negative. And using meditation objects such as the breath really help you to see that and know that. If you keep letting go, then you find some peace from that. You enjoy it more. The mind becomes more stable. The body becomes more relaxed. Mind becomes more relaxed. And you'll realize you can always go to deeper levels of letting go than you maybe experienced before, that you realized you could have. So for the next period we can practice letting go, practice mindfulness of breathing, and get to know yourself better, let go of the unwholesome, cultivate the wholesome, and keep doing that until you hear the sound of the bell.